Good morning. I want to congratulate you, Nyla, on bringing a wonderful idea to fruition and for including us. Thank you. I'm going to begin this morning with a story. I hadn't planned on sharing this, but Anna Lou found me last night and asked me to share this story. Where are you, Anna Lou? Tell her she's getting her way right now. She should come in for this. All right, so the story is called The Silhouette Story. It's a story of an incident experienced by a little girl in grade school. So the story begins. Go to the principal's office right now, young lady. I've had about all I can stand. And call your mother when you get there, Mrs. Harvey, the kindergarten teacher shouted as she pointed her finger in the direction of the door. The young lady, a 6-year-old black child with tight little pigtails and scared eyes, gathered her things and proceeded out the door down a very long hallway to the principal's office. Once she arrived, she was ushered directly to Mr. Hall, the principal, who instructed her to tell him exactly what she'd done wrong. I asked why we couldn't cut out silhouettes of Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks, she said. Mrs. Harvey said we were cutting out silhouettes of famous people, and Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks are famous too, she continued. After hearing her story and without further conversation, Mr. Hall reached for his paddle and instructed the little girl to bend over and swatted her 3 times, hard. Now call your mother, he said. Crying, the little girl did as she was told, and she called her mother. She conveyed the entire story, including the part about having been paddled by Mr. Hall. The girl's mother had only one question. Where does he keep his paddle? On a hook behind his desk, said the little girl. I'm on my way, her mother said before slamming down the phone. The little girl trembled with fear while she sat waiting for her mother to arrive. The fact that her mother had inquired about the exact location of the paddle led her to believe she'd not seen the last of it. In what seemed like barely 5 minutes, the little girl's mother stormed through the door, dressed in her white work uniform, and in a huff, she rushed past the secretary's desk and directly into the principal's office where both the little girl and the principal waited. Without a word, the little girl's mother went behind the principal's desk, retrieved the paddle, and then in one quick motion used the paddle to wipe his desk clean of the piles of paper that had been neatly stacked there, and papers flew everywhere. Not allowing time for a response to this sudden fierce gesture, she raised the paddle, pointing it in the air in the principal's direction, not the little girl's, and said to him, "Bend over." The brave woman in this story is my mother. A woman whose life experiences educated her beyond the walls of a classroom. I am the little girl who, at 6 years old, dared to challenge the absence of representation in the curriculum. This confrontation was about something much bigger than me and my silhouettes. It was about my mother's pain and anger and her struggle to provide the best education for her children in a society that thinks people who look like me deserve less. She taught me, to borrow a phrase from Audre Lorde, that to hide your pain is to hide your power, and that being silent would not protect us from further injury. Without knowing fancy political terms like decolonization, our mother intuitively understood that consciously working to instill positive self-esteem in her Black children was an utter necessity. I am my mother's child. I shared this story at my opening reception where I met Nyla. I did take a moment to assure my new employers that while I had equally effective energy as my mom and fire and thunder, that I have honed different conflict engagement skills. My mother was my first and to this day my most effective teacher. Every good decision I make is guided by her wisdom. I have an older brother who is deaf, and so I grew up watching my mother advocate and fight for his full inclusion in the educational system. So it's no surprise that my early exposure to advocacy for inclusion would ignite my passion to do the same. Once your eyes are open to inequality, it's nearly impossible to unsee disparity, which leads me to my research, Academe Made Possible. When I entered the higher education profession, it was my personal relationships with people, with custodians in particular, that illuminated structural inequalities. A custodian named Eleanor started as my friend and quickly became a member of my chosen family. The first time I met her, she walked into my office on perhaps my first week on the job, and I was a new assistant vice president, and she came in and looked at me and smiled and said, "What you know about working with these folks, big britches?" And by these folks, she meant the wealthy white men who ran the university. The more I became familiar with Eleanor and her life and her struggles, the more my interest in the structures that shaped and created her reality grew. It led me to my research on the lived experiences of women who are employed as custodial workers in higher education. So I want to share a little bit of my research with you, and I realize I have limited time, so I'm sharing excerpts of this. So I interviewed women who work in institutions of higher education, and this is their story. So the purpose of my study was actually to understand the ways classism, as it intersects with racism and sexism, affects how low-wage earning women negotiate their work world in the academy, and the way the academy functions to create, maintain, and reproduce the context within which oppression is able to emerge. So this study was significant because higher education is grounded in notions of democracy and social responsibility. And university mission statements profess to prepare students for responsible citizenship. Yet there's little recognition of the ways that custodial workers literally enable the mission of the academy, as well as the multiple realities they negotiate while they're working. And I contend that universities are uniquely positioned to shape and drive change in this arena. So just a little bit about the nature of higher education for those of you who don't work in higher education, is that faculty and administrators are guardians of an ancient and sacred tradition filled with its own language, filled with its own traditions, and as the custodians would call it, their own costumes, referring to the regalia on commencement days and so forth. And in higher education, honor is conferred upon the educated. There are linguistic practices that maintain the social distance. For example, those of us who are called doctor, professor, and vice chancellor. One of the custodial members became acquainted with a faculty member on a floor she cleaned, and they were both named Diane. So Diane, the custodial member, saw Diane, the faculty member, in the hallway one day and said, "Hi, Diane." She didn't say Dr. fill in the blank. So the faculty member said, "The other day a custodian called me by my first name, and I'm not sure how I feel about that." So she expected to be conferred the honor and to be acknowledged with her honorific, with her title, doctor, and not just her given name. There are defined spaces in higher education. For example, there is a faculty club, there is a student lounge, there are classrooms, and people who work there, study there, understand the space and to whom it belongs. The custodians, what space do they have? They have a custodial closet, right? So higher education also reflects the bias and the power agenda of the society within which it is embedded. Inequality is in the very air that we breathe, so it's no surprise that it's found also in the academy. So a little bit about the multiple roles that custodial staff play. They do more than just clean the institution. They literally hold the reputation of the institution in their hands, right? If you ever think about it, you walk into a place, if it doesn't smell good, if it doesn't look clean, it shapes your perception about the kind of institution that is. So these folks literally hold our image. promote our image. And it's important to know that their job is never ending. So it's kind of like your house, and especially if you have kids. Just right after you've cleaned up, right? You think, I just cleaned up, and they managed to dirty it up again. So this is the job of custodians. They clean a bathroom, and then just a few hours later, they have to clean it again because they are cleaning occupied spaces that are continually dirty. They also perform roles of health and safety. If you think about, just walk yourself through your day going into your place of business and think about the many surfaces that you come into contact with. For example, this clicker. Already this morning, 4 people have held this clicker, right? 4 or 5 people have held this. I think about the bathroom door this morning when I went into the restroom. If the custodians were not sanitizing on a regular basis all of these surfaces, we would all be pretty sick. So it's important to acknowledge that it's more than just your strong immune system that has you healthy today. You got some help with that, all right? So custodians also aid in student retention. They serve as academic advisors. They offer parental advice. They serve as a confidant. And they reported troubling behavior. And here are some examples. So this one custodian said she became acquainted with some students on her floor, the floor she cleaned. And when students were trying to decide what classes to take the following semester, she would tell them, don't take that professor over there in the corner. Because you see his office hours posted on that door, he's never in there when his office hours say he's supposed to be in there. And when he is, students come out of there crying. Take that professor over there. See his office hours, he's in there when his office hours say he's supposed to be in there, and students are happy when they leave his office. And I see him taking time to tutor the students and work with them to help them get better. In fact, I listen so that I can share information with students. Another custodian kept lady things and scantrons that she would find on her cart and then offer them to students as they needed them. And then one custodian talked about teaching freshmen how to do laundry right. It was their first time doing laundry away from home, and they had to do it themselves and didn't quite know how to get that right. And yet another custodian who cleaned in residence halls uncovered a suicide note in the trash. And what she said was, I found a suicide note in the trash and I had to go tell it. So because she frequently cleaned this particular residence hall, she noticed the student's pattern. The student wasn't going to class, had missed class several consecutive days, and when she went in to empty the trash, she noticed a lot more balled up pieces of paper, and so she read the trash. Yes, folks, custodians sometimes read your trash. So she was like, what is all of this? It was an unusual pattern for him, and it was a woman, that she had written several versions of the suicide note, right? So that custodian went and told the resident advisor on that floor, you got a student over here who is in trouble, right? They also aid in energy conservation and facility maintenance by turning off lights and reporting broken things. They deliver items to the lost and found, which the university then typically turns around and sells back to you. And they often provide directions, right? Telling folks where to go because they're very obvious by their uniforms, and they know their way around the space because they're cleaning it. They also experience racism, classism, and sexism. On the racism piece, these positions are largely occupied by people of color because race and class are inextricably linked. They talked about getting mean looks and hate stares that control them, right? So there was some conflating of this and not really knowing how to tease it apart. Is it because the folks think I'm dirty? Is it because they think I'm unclean and they don't want to be in the elevator with me? But people gave them hateful looks and they felt controlled just by a mean look. And also sexism. These positions were largely occupied by women because often cleaning is considered the domain of women. They also spoke about horizontal hostility, and by that meaning that they believed that other women made their work harder. And a direct quote is that the women in the offices create more work for you. It looks like they just want to make you work hard. And then they experience classism. Many of them experience financial and material lack and live paycheck to paycheck. Many of them hold multiple jobs because the one job they have, rather than keeping them out of poverty, actually keeps them in poverty. They live in neighborhoods of deep poverty and, for example, don't even drink the water where they live unless they boil it. They also have to make decisions about how to spend their very limited income. When someone is sick in their family, they have to decide who's the sickest because they don't have enough money to pay the copay for everybody who is sick, right? And if you have kids, multiple kids, one kid gives it to the other kid, and you have to decide who needs help right now the most. And they also refer to their paychecks that a piece of that being negative pay, that they get their paychecks, and somebody described it like it was on a string. They give you the paycheck, and then they start pulling a little bit of it back piece by piece for things like parking, mandatory retirement contribution, and insurance. And these women also had husbands and partners who were in low-wage occupations as well. So I want to talk a little bit about the realm of indignities that these women experienced. So in higher education, we experience students just being students, is what they called it. Students intentionally overflowing commodes, having shaving cream fights, food fights, toilet paper wars, playing basketball with paper and basketball with beer bottles, experimenting by blowing up objects in the microwaves, including mice and rats. Again, students just being students, but they have to clean that up. The custodians also clean both human and animal waste, as well as the remains of deceased humans and animals for those who work in teaching hospitals and vet schools, right? They also deal with displaced hygiene items, and this really, upsets them because they know that you know where to put your used adult undergarments. They know you know where to put your used feminine products, where to put your used condoms, etc., where to put needles that you have already used to put them in the appropriate container versus in a regular trash can that they're going to reach into with their gloved hand is not going to protect them from a needle stick, right? And then the most atrocious thing they talked about was dealing with intentionally displaced excrement, right? So one woman told me of a story in a building that had 6 stories about excrement being placed in the stairwell from the 6th floor to the 1st. About the same excrement being smeared over the handrail, and about how some students will create wall art with their excrement, how they would put it in seats in large lecture halls, sometimes right in front of the podium where the faculty member would stand, on chalkboards, and create freestanding art with it. This is absolutely disgusting, right? We often don't see it. Most of the time we don't see it because they come early in the morning at 4, and by the time we get there at 7:30 or 8, it's gone. So they protect us from these atrocities. So talk a little bit more about number 2, boo-boo, shit, whatever you want to call it. These are Clara's exact words. I asked her, and this is verbatim from a transcript, Clara, how does it make you feel having to clean up somebody else's crap? Actually, I asked Clara and Diane, and Diane said, it really hurts your feelings. It's like, why are they doing this to me? Maybe they think we're just nobody, And Clara said, they probably thought it was funny, I guess. He, notice, probably laughed about it. He probably thought it was so funny. He probably said to himself, I bet some custodian is working now. The other thing I asked them is, who do you think would do a thing like this? And interestingly, every custodian I interviewed had experience with displaced excrement. I asked them all, who do you think is doing this? And they said, white male fraternity members, which is interesting. So markers of marginality. Those who clean in higher education and mostly everywhere wear uniforms, and the uniforms symbolize servitude and they mark the difference, right? Those of us who are wearing suits as opposed to those who are wearing custodial cleaning uniforms, it tells you about people's roles. They are often viewed as untrustworthy and accused of stealing. The one custodian told about the uniforms being changed so that there were no pockets on the uniform to prevent them from stealing. They are also highly regulated, occasionally relocated, and often feel like they are strangers at home. They see themselves as part of the institution, but they know they're really not part of the institution. They can't really fully participate in the life of the institution. And they experience what they call fleeting greetings, relationships with occupants and coworkers that have no depth to them, right? So they talked about some will just take your Rubbermaid and just push it around or something, just playing around with you, or talk about something like the weather, nothing much. And they feel both at the same time obliterated and agonizingly visible. One custodian said they look right through me, like they don't even see me. And the other said they see me and they snarl up at me. And they also clean both occupied and unoccupied spaces, and it should come as no surprise that they prefer to clean unoccupied space because they can clean it and leave it clean and walk away, and they also don't have to deal with individuals interacting with them and engaging them and reinforcing the race and gendered scripts, right? Making them feel less than because they're cleaning. And they also make it clear that others let them know where their place is and whose space it is. Somebody keeping time for me here? Okay, I'm good. All right, so body and soul. Cleaning is hard labor. It's one of the dirtiest, and it is the least desirable work. It's also hazardous work. One of the custodians said, I get real concerned about the chemicals and stuff we work with. A lot of stuff is not real good for you. As an aside, I still do this research, and I've learned that many folks are using green cleaning products now. And that's both good for the environment, it's good for the individual in terms of what they breathe in, but it also makes the work harder for them because it doesn't have the same level of astringent in it and that sort of thing. So it makes it harder for them. There's aching, fatigue, occupational hazards, and injuries from repetitive motions. And one of them said, this is hard work out here, Becky, it'll get next to you eventually. They are often not fully insured, and this is by choice to save money. And they experience the cumulative effect of repeated microaggressions. And they know that their bodies are read as unworthy and sometimes dangerous, and they experience what is called money sickness, literally feeling sick and worried because they lack. But the women also have agency. And one of the things they do, so I ask them, so this environment that you work in, wow, it's really difficult. How do you find joy? What keeps you here, right, besides the paycheck? And they focus on the positive aspects of it, that it's a good job. Another way they exert their agency is by realistic pacing. So if the expectations increase, demands increase, if square footage is added without adding more people, they will realistically pace themselves and strategically make sure somebody's office doesn't get cleaned who they know is a squeaky wheel, right? They also elevate their status while putting the occupants down. In other words, they condemn the condemners. One custodian said, we're just as good as the faculty. Why are they more important? They're not, they're just people. They may have more education and stuff than we do, but that's all. Some people, they got education, but they're dumber than stumps. Another one said, the people in the office, they nice enough, but sometimes it look like they don't really do no work. They just sit at their desk and type on their computer, and they get paid big money for that. I don't understand that. And another one jokingly said, for the most part, I got good people in my building. But this one lady, she messy. She just messy. She eats and eats, like she likes junk food. And she eats and then she has crumbs all over her desk, all on the floor, all over the computer, everywhere. And I have to get this little brush to clean her keyboard. What? All right. Okay. Suffice it to say, they talk about you if you're dirty. All right. So rehearse. Wait. I skipped one. All right, all right, all right. I'm going to go faster. Okay, let me skip to this one. So I asked the custodian, so you are not really at liberty to talk to folks who are in charge, but if you could, what would you say? And I called this rehearsal of liberation. And what they want you to know is that they are broke, but not broken. They don't want your pity or your leftover food. And they want to warn you about the danger of a single story. They are more than just custodians. Don't flatten me. I am many other things. They want to say to you, see me, a good morning, I never hurt nobody. Respect me, and remember me when you are implementing major institutional changes, right? So they want to know, like, if you know you are moving, let them know that you are moving your office so that they can plan accordingly. If there is something on the chalkboard, if you've written a formula and you don't want it erased, put do not erase on there, so respect them. And the daytime cleaning piece, when they are cleaning the restroom, they see the look of desperation on your face because you have waited until the last minute for that bio break, and you show up and the restroom is closed. They will let you in, but respect them, right? That restroom doesn't belong to you any more than it belongs to them, and they are simply doing their jobs. Don't just shove past them. So there are some implications for practice that perhaps I will talk more about later. But I want to end with asking us to ask ourselves, are my hands clean? So human hands created inequality, and human hands can create equality. And the way to escape the inequality trap, I'll close with the words of the custodians. See me, respect me, and remember me. Thank you.